Thank you for your question, Jeremiah. It's asking how do we tackle data privacy and data protection laws when dealing with big data mining, analytics, deep learning, and predictions? That's really the one of the main challenges that we face. So I think broadly speaking, we've talked about two main challenges. One is how do you actually collect the data, which is what Peter really covered very nicely. The challenges in just getting the data in a digital format. Then the problem becomes, once it's digitized, because it can be shared so easily, how do we protect data privacy? It's really the heart of the issue, and it's a balance that has to be struck between, the needs of providing a solution and understanding the data versus the right the individual has to the privacy of their data. So one part of this comes down to obviously legislation, and it comes down to data privacy laws. Of course, we have those here in Kenya. Companies like IBM have provided input or feedback to the Ministry of ICT as those have been developed. So obviously, it's important that those are adhered to ensure that the privacy of the individual can be protected. But at the same time, we have to correlate data, and if the data points to the individual needing to take action, we need a mechanism where we can identify that individual if that is required. And so really the main tool here that we would use is to hide information that anyone could access to identify the individual, replace it with some other identifier that's used internally so that the privacy can be protected as that information is being exchanged and processed, so that we're very specific about when and where and who is able to match that identifier, whatever it is, to the real person. I know some have suggested there are some really good identifiers that could be used, like phone numbers, like ID numbers. The problem with those, of course, is it's not too hard to find out who the person is. So typically what you do, and I think Peter touched on this, is you introduce a new identifier that if you were to gain access to it, you wouldn't be able to match it to a person unless you are able to map it to ID information, phone numbers, names, and so forth. That's really the key technique. And it ensures that only at very specific points are you able to connect that new identifier with the phone number, with the ID number, and actually have an organization that's able to figure out who that person is. So that's what I meant by obfuscation. It's a technique. There are actually tools that can do it automatically when data is being exchanged between data scientists, so that it's easy for them to work. They'll be able to correlate information from a particular person without being able to figure out who that person is unless they're authorized to do so.
Okay, maybe if I can take a little bit from what Ben has said. I've just uploaded the video that didn't play. If the moderator allows me, I can be able to play it. But to add on to what Ben has said, one of the critical aspects around is data protection, and Kenya passed Data Protection Act 2019 last year. And the biggest challenge is how do you protect people's privacy but also provide critical services to them? That's the key question that we have. So obfuscation is one of the main ways. So one of the things that I touched on was because a device can ask for a unique identifier, a person can decide not to give that unique identifier. So what can happen is we give them a tag and a barcode number, and they're allowed to send that barcode number, for example, to a USSD code to a network operator. Because general public is not allowed to access that information from the network operator, and that information is only government accessible, then when such a situation arises where such a person is flagged as having the virus, then the network operator is the one that issues alerts to the people who are around that person at that time. So it prevents also third parties from having access to someone's unique identifiers. So that's just one example of how. So I'll take a question from Saga, who's asked about the monitoring digitally. it uses the same sensors as the medical devices being used. One example is a Melexis sensor. They have thermal imaging, infrared medical temperature sensors that are used. But now it will get a bit more technical if I go beyond that. And then to Pauline, the issue of using facial biometrics again comes into, again, privacy. Who handles that information? It's one of the methods being used, but you have to look at the situation of Africa in terms of how cheap or how expensive is it to deploy such a system, and how many people can you test within a given time frame or within a given period. So those are the two things that you have to look at when you are developing a solution, especially for this region of the world, because cost is a very key determinant of adoption of the systems by the general public. Because one example you look at it is that, for example, let's say we are not even going to farmer markets, but look at it in terms of, let's say, a large flower farm in Naivasha that has to monitor 1,000 casual laborers coming in and going out. Then how do you make them have a test device that is cost effective to them, but also enabling them to keep their workers safe? And the same situation replicates in industry in terms of factories and such kind of work areas. Now, for Ochanda, David's question, I'd say that at the moment, from the information I have, the thermal records that are being taken are being recorded on notebooks. There is no kind of analysis that is currently being done. Hotspots are being identified in terms of people are quarantined, they're tested, you have found that you came from this place and you were positive. Therefore, they go and try to find your contacts. So that's one other challenge that has been there, contact tracing. Because you'll find like people are quarantined, yet they did not need to be. So that's why we have a GPS in the system we are doing, so that the people who are around there at that particular moment can actually be traced much easier. Then to Polly Gitau, again, the information that is being collected is meant to be for advising government in terms of optimization of resources, especially if it is something done in collaboration with the Public Health Ministry. And this is why the issue again of data privacy, as Ben has talked about, comes into play, because there are so many other partners that need to be engaged so that we can ensure that the information collected about individuals is actually protected. So, for example, I cannot go and deploy such a system myself and say, now I want to collect people's data, then no one knows how I use it. Yeah.
Okay, I hope you guys have answered all the questions. So, once again, on behalf of CIO East Africa, thank you very much. Ben, you want to answer a question?
There was one about how chatbots can be used in a secure way. I've shared some information on how even GDPR and HIPAA compliance can be met with assistant technology. It's important to keep in mind, we've got to keep a balance between the privacy of the individual and the need to really understand how this virus is affecting communities so we can warn individuals. So it's a balancing act. I think this particular episode that we're going through is really going to force every country in the world to be confronted with the challenges we've discussed. How do you collect data? How do you analyze it? How do you address an urgent life-threatening need while still respecting the privacy of the individual? Those are kind of the three big problems the whole world is working on. I think I'm optimistic that we'll come out of this with some great answers, and that will help us not just with this challenge, but with other challenges that we face as humankind.
Thank you, Ben. All right, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of CIO East Africa, I'd like to say thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you for bearing with us with the connectivity issues we've had. I would like to also thank the speakers for their well-prepared presentations. Thank you for sharing thank you for sharing your knowledge around big data, especially in this age, and some of the amazing things that are happening out there. As usual, we will share a recording of the presentation for those that joined us late. Secondly, all the presentations are sitting in the handouts window, so you can just download them from there. We will share a link with the video as promised, and we look forward to you joining us next week on Tuesday for another session on leadership in this moment of crisis, and we wish you a good afternoon. Thank you and take care.